I am Dennis Swift. I'm a member of the board of trustees of the Southwest Harbor Public Library, the heart of our community. And we have a very special program for you this evening. Southwest Harbor and Bass Harbor have for centuries been fishing villages. The economy was about fishing. Men caught sardines, women snipped off the heads and the tails and packed them into cans. Sardines provided good paying jobs. By driving around town, you could tell how good the fishing was. Houses were painted, new trucks were in the yard. In a year that was off, houses were not painted, trucks were deferred for another year. For those of us of a certain age, we remember visiting the Stinson factory and the Underwood Factory in Bass Harbor. And we watched with quite amazement at the speed and the dexterity of the packers putting those sardines in the can. During this program this evening, we will hear from men and women who worked in that business. It is now my pleasure to welcome to you Gary Stoloff, who will begin. Gary, you are up.
I'm Nan Lincoln. And I apologize that I'm going to be reading a lot of what I say here. What I say here, just because my memory is not as sticky as it used to be. Okay. The scissors have been stilled at Stinson's, the lightning quick hands that snipped, cut, and packed the sardines that flowed through Southwest Harbor's sardine cannery now lie idle, except perhaps in sleep, when, with the memories of years of swift movement, they twitch restlessly, holding the phantom tools of their trade. Okay, Terese? Go ahead. That was the opening paragraph of a story I wrote for the Bar Harbor Times, the late great Times, some 40 years ago, when Stinson Sardine Cannery in Southwest Harbor closed its doors for the last time. Presiding over that closure was plant manager Peter Colson, who is here today, and we hope will share, in fact we know he will share some of his own stories about his decades at Stinson's, starting as an odd jobs boy when his dad Willard Colson was manager, and the many folks he worked with there, both managers like himself and line workers like Bee Black and her fellow herring chokers, Eudora Lewis, Millie Leonard, Dot Douglas, Althea Whitmore, and Rita Pollard. Rita is also here with some firsthand memories of her days on the Stinson packing line. Some of these women spent most of their adult lives at Stinson's, where if they worked fast and hard, they could make a decent wage, and for some, equally as important, form lifelong friendships. Oh, there were some who said you couldn't make a good wage, B. Black told me for that Times article, but they were the ones who weren't willing to do the work. I'd tell them, you can't make money if you're going to spend a third of your time smoking. And here we have Millie Leonard. Is that right? Did we decide yet? Millie Leonard and Louise Dow, who were remembered as some of the good workers. Millie was also considered a great wit and walked to and from work from her home on Beach Hill. Louise Dow was remembered by her granddaughter as a wonderful woman who shared a table with her grandmother, Florence Pettigrew. Althea Whitmore said that she started out at Stinson's making only 8 cents a case, but she was happy for the work. For a while, Althea took off a few months to work for summer people. Pretty soon, she said, I figured out I'd rather work 12 hours a day packing fish than work half that time for summer folks. B. Black also said it was the family feel of the place as much as the wage she was going to miss when Stinson's closed. Oh, we were a nice crowd, B said. The best of people. If someone couldn't finish their pack, we'd all pitch in. In addition to Stinson's, there were several other sardine packing plants on the quiet side of Mount Desert Island. But for this program, a joint effort of the Southwest Harbor Public Library and Tremont Historical Society, we're going to focus on the 2 largest ones, Stinson's, and the Underwood Factory in Bass Harbor. And there they are. Last fall, we sent out an inquiry on social media asking folks for their recollections of working at one of the area sardine canneries or stories passed down from family members. We got many responses, and what follows are those first and second-hand stories from the factory floor. Our readers are Gary Stelflood, Kathy Pratt, me, Nan Lincoln, my daughter Alexandra Lincoln, and Terese Miller, who organized all these wonderful slides, is also going to be in charge of that. Okay, the Underwood Sardine Factory. We'll start with Underwood's. In 1889, after an increasing number of summer folks complained about the smell from their fish packing plant in Southwest Harbor, the Underwood Company moved their operation to Bass Harbor, building a state-of-the-art facility on the eastern shore facing Menard. In addition to its sturdy brick facade, the new factory had floor-to-ceiling windows to let in the light at a time when electricity couldn't be counted on. Underwood soon became a major employer in the area. Workers there recalled how, when the whistle blew at the plant, alerting them that the fish carriers had arrived loaded with herring, they would wait for a bus to come and pick them up and take them to the plant.
My mother worked at Underwood's, along with most people all around Bass Harbor. News would travel when the carriers were docked, and folks would ride down to check the water line to see how much of a load was being carried. That would give them an idea of how to plan for the amount of work coming up. Erwin Seavey.
Carl Buddy Lawson Jr. is seen here taking out herring at his weir in Duck Cove. He also had weirs in Opechee or Calf Island and Bar Island with his father. He was considered the last weirman of the backside, and for decades supplied herrings to Underwood Factory. The sardine boom peaked in the 1940s, and in those days it seemed inconceivable that the supply of herring would run out. But after decades of overfishing, it did. Long before that happened, however, the Underwood Factory was a vital financial and social resource for the community. Even when it was closed for the winter, the Underwood Company did not forget its workers.
Underwood's had a Christmas party every year for the families that work there. I remember them opening up the factory and having a tree with some cake and ice cream and a little wrapped gift. I got a little tie pin with a train on it, which I still have someplace. Erwin Seavey.
In fishing season, the factory brought steady paychecks to families throughout Tremont and Bass Harbor, which from 1901 to 1961 was renamed McKinley. Praised for its clean floors and fair pay, the plant fried sardines in oil and even canned tiny whole lobsters for export. It quickly became the center of local life, with its brick smokestacks and twin water towers visible from miles away.
The Underwood Company sardine carrier Romer, seen here, was 62 feet long, and my uncle Alvin Walls was captain for many years. She has just unloaded here and now comes clean up. It's high tide and looks like they just finished hoisting fish. David Reed.
The sardine carrier Fishhawk, seen here, unloading at the Underwood Factory, according to Val Perkins, was built at the Quincy, Massachusetts shipyard in 1915.
I think my grandfather Spider Lewis was made on the Fishhawk. John Pettigrew. Yes, his grandfather Clarence Spider Lewis was made with Captain Sherrill Wilson. Val Perkins.
If the wages were decent, the work was not without risk. Erwin Seavey recalled being leery of the sealer machines.
When the covers were put on the cans, the sealer machine placed them on with a force that shook the whole floor. The packer's scissors were sharp and dangerous. They cut off the heads and tails before putting them in the cans, but the side of the empty cans were very sharp as well. Erwin Seavey.
Jane Howard worked at Underwood's when she was 15 years old and remembers it as grueling.
I wanted to earn some money for school clothes, It was tiring for me to stand on my feet for hours at a time. I didn't stay there very long though. I developed blood poisoning in my arm, so I had to quit. Jane Howard.
Mr. Seavey recalled if cans got damaged during the processing, they were called dents, and the employees could buy them very cheaply. He added that McKinley had a very unpleasant odor during the packing season. The local saying was, Southwest Harbor by the sea, McKinley by the smell. In the winter, when the factory shut down, Mr. Seavey recalls standing in the huge unemployment line with his mother at the Oddfellows building, which is now Cafe Dry Dock.
People worked hard during the summer months, as jobs were scarce in the winter. This was a way of life in the 1950s, Erwin Seavey.
Some folks put real effort into bringing home dents and fresh fish from Underwoods.
I recall how my grandfather, George Trask, used to row across the harbor to hang out and help where he could at the Underwood Cannery. He would bring home dented cans for us and fresh herring for our cats. One cat would wade out to meet his hunt coming ashore in anticipation of the fish. Also, the cannery sometimes dumped cooking oil and cuttings from the herring into the harbor. We used to fish for pollock and flounder off the Underwood dock. Maybe they were attracted by the cuttings. Muriel Davison.
Here we have Underwood workers John Reed, Eugene Brewster, Eugene Kelly, and Ben Higgins.
Diddy Merchant was a boiler man at Underwood's. My dad was friarhead and boiler man through a lot of the 60s. I can remember Dad teaching me how to start the oil boiler. The state awarded Dad Boiler Man of the Year a couple times. He always said, if the oil boiler goes to hell, they will want to bring back the old coal boiler. Stephen Allen Carter. That's right. They converted in the late 1950s and early 1960s from coal to oil. Cleaner and not the upkeep and maintenance. Valper. I still remember Nita Layton and Rachel Francis packing fish. It was mesmerizing watching how fast they were and how they did that with a half a mile of tape on their fingertips. Nice.
How they taped them was according to the size of the fish. I can remember answering the phone when they would call, saying they had fish. My grandmother would always ask me what size they were so she could tape her fingers accordingly. Garber Merchant Pettigrove.
And here's Flora Reed on the Underwood line. During the war years, she and the other packers doubled their work, and the U.S. government awarded them medals for their essential war effort.
I remember them blowing the whistle, as my dad was the one who blew it for years. For those who can remember, he also drove the old factory bus to pick up a lot of the packers for Underwoods. The government brought tons of canned sardines to feed troops during World War II. Factory whistles blew day and night as workers rushed to fill military orders. Stephen Allen Carter.
After Underwood's closed in the late 1950s, they tried to pack blueberries for Jasper Wyman at the facility and even mouse food for the Jackson lab. In its final incarnation, the building was used for an illicit marijuana smuggling business. I would say at the side that at that time, I was a young mom and I ran the Bass Harbor Country Store at the time, and I had penny candy and quilts and baked bread, a lot of handcrafts. And I remember these guys in these shiny shoes and pointy and shiny suits and pointy shoes coming in and wondering, why the heck don't you have a cigarette machine in here? And I suspected that they were not the marine biologists. They said that. And they had a couple of big Doberman pinchers that they installed on the factory floor. And when I came to work in the morning, they would hurl themselves against those doors, you know, obviously trying to get off me. But that was my experience with drug smuggling. After those folks were busted and fled the scene, the community hoped the handsome brick building with its floor-to-ceiling windows facing the harbor would become a marine museum or other maritime-related enterprise. But eventually it was bought by developers who, at the start of the new millennium, transformed the old factory into luxury condominiums, which, if you're interested, go for a little more than $1 million a pop. In 1885, a sardine factory was started at the John T.R. Freeman Wharf in Southwest Harbor. The owner, Alton Farnsworth, sold the factory in 1901 to the Addison Packing Company, and in 1931, its owner, Jones Wass, sold the factory to Calvin Stinson of Stinson and Son. For many years, it was still called Addison's, but for clarity, we'll primarily use Stinson's.
My grandmother, Vi Parrott, worked 47 years at Stinson's. I did 2 summers there and that was enough. I don't know how those ladies did it. Nancy Savage Suka.
Stinson's plant grew with more workspace added over the years. Eventually, the main packing room was 120 by 100 feet and could accommodate 85 packers. Stinson's also installed a fish pump to make the unloading of the fish more efficient and less damaging. A factory bus transported the workers when the fish came in.
My mom, Rita Farley, worked there as a floor lady. She would keep count of what the ladies packed for fish and take care of the break room. I'm sure she had other duties, but I didn't pay much attention, except I know she had long days and usually would ride the bus provided to get the women to and from work. Faye Masterson.
It must have been my uncle Andrew Hart, who lived in Ellsworth, driving that bus. He also worked in the canning room. At age 16, I was working as a bailman, bailing herring onto a conveyor belt from waist-deep holding pens, dumped full of herring off the carriers lined up at our wharf. I was making 95 cents an hour, when $1 per hour was considered a very good wage for an adult laborer, Stephen Herrick.
When it was still called Addison's, 10 camps were erected within walking distance of the Stinson plant. Dot Douglas worked at Stinson's as what she called a herring choker for 53 years until its closing in 1987. She remembered living in those factory houses with a 3-holer.
I know that sounds terrible, but those were the happiest days of my life. Dot Douglas.
Those 3-holer camps were crammed close together and they all burned down together in the 60s. You said, Peter?
March 17th, 1966.
My mother worked at the Underwood Factory, and I worked there as a teenager before I entered the military. She also worked at the Southwest Harbor Factory in her spare time. Like we said in Maine, there were 2 jobs to break even and 3 jobs to get ahead. Frank Chantal Reese.
Suzanne Miller worked a few seasons at Stinson's as a teen. She wrote this essay about her experiences there.
The Summer of '62 by Suzanne Madeira. In the early summer of 1962, my friend Barbie Workman said she was packing sardines and making a lot of money. I can't remember how much, but it was a lot more than I had been making babysitting. My parents reluctantly agreed to let me apply after my dad spoke with their manager, Willard Colson, and decided it would be okay. I caught on quickly and was enjoying seeing my cans piling up faster every day. But after a week or 2, I began talking with whoever was on the other side of the table and asking questions about random topics, none of which pertained to the job. Soon after, it seemed like every day I was assigned a different table. Finally, I found out that no one wanted to pack with me because all the chatter slowed them down and they didn't make as much money. No reflection, I'm sure, on my skill as an excellent conversationalist. I worked at a table by myself for a while until one day when a worker was out sick in the boxing room and they had to find someone to fill in. It made sense to choose one of the slower packers, so they asked me, and I was delighted to try something new. After being cooked and sealed, the cans spilled off a conveyor belt onto the table. 2 of us had to pack them neatly into boxes as fast as they came out. This was fun for a few days, but then the regular boxer returned, back to packing sardines. Then someone was absent from the machine that put oil in the cans. Again, I was asked to fill in, and again, it was interesting to see another aspect of the business. But someone discovered that I wasn't old enough to legally work on the machinery, so back to snipping off fish heads and tails. Not long after, they needed someone to put hot chili peppers into the cans on top of the sardines. I did that for one afternoon. That night, my hands swelled up and burned so intensely I couldn't sleep. After that, I concentrated on my packing skills and even found I could refrain from talking most of the time. One day, there was a terrible chemical smell. I found it hard to breathe and it kept getting stronger. There was a row of windows across from me, so I went to one for some fresh air. Throwing it open, I stuck my head out and took a big breath. To my horror, I saw a huge cloud of ammonia steam coming out from the building just under that very window. I was staggering and almost fell from the ammonia I had inhaled. Shouts of "Close that window!" brought me to my senses. Apparently, the regular packers were accustomed to smelling the ammonia, which was used as a refrigerant in part of the factory floor below us. Anyway, it was really nice to get a big paycheck every week. Almost all of it went into my savings account, although I would have enjoyed stopping at the soda fountain at Carroll Drugstore, which I passed on my way home. But I didn't because I know how fishy I smelled after work. My work at Stinson's that year ended abruptly. There were packing tables on both sides of the conveyor belt, and the herring were piled high as they started their journey down the line of packers. Each woman, at Stinson there were no male packers, would sweep an armful of fish onto her table whenever she needed more. One of the rules of behavior prohibited reaching onto the belt with scissors in your hand. However, if your scissor hand was the one closer to the belt, it's understandable that it slows you down to remove the scissor every time. One day near the end of August, I was at the beginning of the line and the fish were piled very high. As I reached out to pull a batch of herring onto my table, I felt a strong tug as though someone were pulling my hand. A flow of blood revealed 2 of my fingers had been sliced by the scissors of the person on the other side of the conveyor. I could see the cuts were bad and headed for the office, where I assumed someone would get me to the doctor. Mr. Wass was on the phone, so I waited until he hung up and, sounding very cranky, he said, "You're getting blood all over the floor." Feeling as though I were asking for a huge favor, I said I thought I needed to see a doctor and didn't have a ride. Suddenly, he sounded surprisingly sympathetic and said he would get someone to drive me to the clinic. After 8 stitches on one finger and a bandage on the other, I walked home, done for the day and done for the season. The poor woman who broke the rule was horrified to realize what she had done. On my first day of school, during recess, she drove up and found me hanging out with a friend. She apologized profusely and gave me a box of chocolates. Suzanne Madeira.
Rita Pollard, who worked at Stinson as a Stinson's packer for a little over 2 years, was it?
Yeah.
Yeah. She's here and she's gonna share, and she's actually gonna demonstrate some of the
Well, I
things
was
that
show
she
and
was
tell
called
her.
on. Yeah, this
Okay.
is our show and tell moment.
My real profession was a teacher for a number of years, right over here in Pemmican. Well, she talked about taping fingers and using a lot of tape. So the first thing you do before the bus came, you'd have this whole line of tape. And this is how we did it. We'd have gauze and then you'd put a cross on one finger like this. And then you would take the tape and just wrap it around and you would have this bandage on your fingers. Well, same time I made some, and I actually used to make them this way so that at lunchtime I could take them off. Cause I couldn't bear to eat my lunch with these taped fingers, so this was a way of doing it when you use the gauze. You can just oh, I lost one like this too. Anyway, so I decided we were gonna have the uniform, okay? We all had plastic aprons. And I think you guys would make money on us, because they always have a little store. And you could buy tape, and you could buy scissors, and you could have them sharpened, and you could buy these and So this was our gear. And then you always had the, sorry, here now. And that was very fashionable for a 16-year. And then, of course, I lost one of my fingers here. A lot of people would come into the factory for a tour and they thought we had cut our fingers. Even Nan said that's what she thought, but this was for protection. And the old adhesive that we used was much stronger than this stuff nowadays. It was really tough. And these were, Peter gave me these scissors to demonstrate. This was what they were like, very sharp. And then if you did grab a hold of your finger with a scissor when you were doing it, it wouldn't cut through. So it was more for protection. So anyway, that was our uniform. Some women wore dresses, some wore shorts, some wore pants. You had good shoes on of some sort that wasn't slippery, but you all looked like this, which wasn't exactly very attractive. So the first thing I wanted to mention about working in a factory, in 16, you go in and it assaults literally your senses, your 5 senses. You walk in and the first thing is hearing. I have hearing aids, probably because I worked in the factory. The machinery, the boom, 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 putting the lids on the cans. The cans coming down the chute. They had a guy upstairs that Peter said was deaf, and I know why. He was responsible for shoving the cans down the chute. And then you'd gather up your cans. And then you had the belt going by. And then you had people talking over all this din. So they were loud and it was just noise, noise, noise. And then sight. Everywhere you look, people were the busyness, people running here, running there. And you got the women that are rocking back and forth, you know, and you got just everywhere there's stuff to see in movement. Then you had touch. Now I'm 16 and I'm a girl and I don't like slimy things, right? But I'm working in a fish factory. It's got raw fish coming down a belt. And the only way I'm going to get to pack them is if I scoop them onto my table. So you got this feeling of that. And you get used to it, of course. You had to because there was no other option. And then taste and smell. Do they go together? So like I said, I removed these when I went to eat my snack or my lunch because I just couldn't stand the odor. And things did still tend to smell and taste like fish, but you had to get used to it. And even 50 years later, I went down the coast of Maine with my granddaughter who was collecting state parks. And we stayed in Lubec, and they have a factory down there that they had made into a hotel. And they built a restaurant on the end of it, and they had nice cabins on the side. And we decided to stay there that night. Now, I walk in with my husband into the office, and I go, I hope the cabin is available because I'm not going to be able to sleep in this place. I could still smell it. I could still smell. And I'm wondering about these $1 million condos.
One and it didn't smell. I was, you know, testing.
So the next thing was more about how the factory operates, how piecework operates, because there aren't many jobs anymore that you're paid by piecework. And when you first started working there, you had a couple weeks to get up to speed. You had to learn, they taught you, and to make the math easy, the minimum wage was $1.25. 100 cans of one type size fish was $1.25. So basically you had to pack 100 cans to make the minimum wage. Now I was pretty fast, so I could do 300 to 400 cans. So I made really good money. So it didn't take me long to just whiz by that minimum wage. But in the beginning, when you didn't make the minimum wage, let's say you packed 75 cans, the company made up the difference. So when you got the paycheck that week, if you didn't make your minimum, they made up the difference. So you did get $1.25 an hour. But they only do that till you get to that point where you're making your money. After that, there's no going back to that. Okay, so probably, I wanna say it was the third summer. And we didn't get many fish from Maine anymore. So that would have been like 1968. And we had a bunch of fish come in from Canada on tanker trucks. Now the fish would be put in these trucks and they're supposed to have the feed out of them when they're put into the tanker truck. So they wouldn't tear. Now they weren't spoiled, but the soft bellies with the food in it would sometimes cause the belly to tear open. So by the time we got them and we're putting them on our table, you had to paw through them because they didn't want us packing bad looking fish. They weren't spoiled, but they just didn't look pretty. So, and during that day, I remember specifically, I was only able to get about 75 cans in an hour because I was trying to paw through them and pick out the good ones. And we had heard through the grapevine that they had a load of fish coming in a few hours that had been caught fresh. And they were kind of keeping us around till that landed. And we decided as a group, somehow through the grapevine, that we didn't want to pay ourselves for the next 2 hours, which is what we were doing. If I packed 75 cans, the 50 cents difference was being taken from my pay from another day. Okay, they were taking it from there. They were just the average of my pay. And we all kind of didn't like that. So we decided we'd rather sit down and wait for those fish. So we started chumming the fish. Now the wasted fish is called chum, and where you put them is the chum hole. But we just started bringing them in, strumming them down. And finally caught on to what we were doing. And they pulled the belt. They stopped everything and told us to go sit down, and when the new fish came in, they bring us back to work. So we won that bet. I guess, I don't know, but it was kind of like a way to, a protest, really. And my last story is Tuesdays and Fridays were live bands in Bar Harbor. Now, any of you that were around down during those days, you had the Tin Garage, and then another year there was the Sandcastle, and then there was the casino. And every year they tore down and they put it in a new place. And they tear it down and put it in. They were trying to get rid of the bands, but that wasn't working. So this was probably the middle year because it was the Sandcastle that I was at, and they brought in sand, and you would dance on bare feet on the sand to the live bands. Well, I went to work that day in curlers. And I have a picture somewhere, but I couldn't find it, of me in my curlers with my net, with a bandana. And I got home after work. I soaked in that tub for hours till it got so cold. I was just so wanting to be clean. Took my hair out, got all ready, and off I went. So I'm out there on the dance floor and they have the black lights, you know, all that stuff. And I'm just dancing away, and all of a sudden I look and I see something shiny. I had fish scales. I was horrified. I'm 16, 17 years old. I ran to the bathroom. And I'll tell you, after that, I never left that house without checking my arms. Well, those are my stories.
Thanks, Rita. In addition to earning more money for packing more sardines, the women on the line took great pride at having the fastest hands.
There was a woman named Hilda Merchant from Hall Quarry who was the fastest packer at one time, Janice James.
She always amazed me. It looked like her hands weren't even moving. Betty Archilles. Thank you. Yes, Hilda was my mother, and she won trophies for being the fastest packer. Hazel Young.
Emily Trask Eaton says her grandmother, Emily Trask, worked as a packer pretty much her whole life. And when they closed the factory, she was the oldest packer at age 85. While the women reigned in the packing room at Stinson's, the men were in charge of the heavy machinery, such as the flaker. One of them was Steve Herrick, who recalled the flaking machine as an endless belt that married 18 by 30-inch wire mesh trays with the herring coming up on another endless belt from the baling room below. He said it was a tough job for two workers who had to manhandle the herring-laden trays into wooden slotted racks about 6 feet high. Each rack would hold about 15 trays and was destined for the nearby steam room for the initial cooking of the herring.
I'd be one of the two men with the job of taking every other tray from the end of the belt and sliding it into the next slot in a wooden rack. When the rack was full, I had to push it away and pull up an empty rack while my partner handled the 3 or 4 arriving trays until I was back in place. May sound easy, but I dropped quite a few trays that first day before I found the rhythm. Steve Herrick.
In 1933, a young woman named Rachel Gott Francis went to work for Wass's sardine plant in Bass Harbor, cutting and packing herring. She later joined the packing line at Stinson's. Her granddaughter, Deborah Willie, says Rachel never complained about the toll it took on her back, standing bowed over the packing tables for hours on end, or the cuts the sharp blades of her scissors inflicted on her hands. Rachel had been on the line for 55 years when Stinson's closed its doors in 1987, putting her and the other ladies of the line out of work for the first time in their adult lives.
It was hard when they closed the plant. Working was such a big part of my mother's life. Rachel's daughter, Jacqueline Hart.
Peter Colson is here, and he was the Stinson's manager at that time, and he's here to explain about the canning process and other adventures in sardine cannery, including the great chocolate sardine caper, which we're all looking forward to hearing, exploding pressure cookers, and other close calls. And please feel free when he's finished with his presentation to ask questions of any of us or share stories of your own. Peter, take it away.
Well, this could take a while. I started working at the factory when I was about 8 years old, not getting paid anything. And my father was the plant manager. All I had to do was run down over the hill and go into the plant. Well, I thought I should make some money while I'm down there. So I got together with a shipping foreman, and we decided I'd buy the cans for 8 cents, and then I would turn around and sell them for 10 cents without leaving the barn. I had people lined up halfway up the hill, and I had enough money that summer to buy my school clothes. Another one was I would pick up the mackerel that was coming in on the fish certain times of the year, and I would box them up, take them over to Stanley Fish Wharf, sell them for 10 cents a pound. And then I even had a fish inspector that lived in Ellsworth, and he would take some of the mackerel, take them up to Ellsworth where he knew he could sell them, gave me the money for them. So that worked out pretty well. But no, I enjoyed it, and I'd still be there right now if they hadn't closed up the entire thing. I worked in Prospect Avenue, after we got done in Southwest Avenue. So I had 41 years then. My father had 46 years then. I was trying to beat his record, but didn't make it because they closed up. But the process was really interesting. There was a lot of hard work. A lot of people, Andy Davis behind me, he spent all weekend boiling trays. And when the fish oil got onto the trays, it built up to the point where the fish inspector would make us clean them. So you have to put them in a tap, put them into a tank and boil them. And that was all night. And that's after you worked all week. And because I did it, Ronnie Pomeroy down there, he and I did it together. But still, we didn't complain. We'd take a nap a little bit and then right back when the trays rather, came out. So some of the other labor work was when the fish came into the holding tanks, they had to be refrigerated. So you'd have to drain the water out and then fill the tanks back up with refrigerated brine. That's where the ammonia smell comes from. But, one of the guys that was in one of the camps that burnt down, he used to bail them out of the tank and put them into a sluice. They would go to the flaking machine. And, that was hard work. Eventually, they ended up putting a spout on the end of the tank and let the fish out. It was a lot easier. But that was a lot of work all day long, just bailing fish out of the tank. So then, like Rita said, back in line, you'd have your complaints once in a while, fish weren't good. But then some people cut the fingers pretty bad, and I'm related to one of them. But that wasn't easy work for the women. They wondered why men wouldn't pack fish. The dexterity wasn't there, and the backs wouldn't hold up. Because they're standing there, and back then, when I first started, they would work until 6:30 to 7 o'clock at night. And sometimes even later if we had to finish work out. So they would be there at 6:30 in the morning, work till 6:30 to 8 o'clock at night. And they even stopped for supper. But so when the fish came on, the women packed the fish. They would, if there was two different sizes, they had to pack one size on one tray, then there'd be another tray outside of that. And then the person that, once they got 100 cans, 4 trays, a person would come and pick, cases up, and then put them into a car, punch the ticket, and then once the car got full, they would be transformed over to the steam boxes. And that was a pre-cook. And that allowed the fish oil and the water to get out of the product. Because once they came out of the steam box, the cat was put on its side and drained the water out. And then they were put into a dryer. And the product had to be cooled down enough so then they could put them in and get the sauce put in and covers put on. And those are the sealing machines right there. And on the left-hand side of that machine, there's a silver, like a dome on there. Underneath that is where the oil was put into the product, soybean oil. But if they did a sauce, there was what we used to call it the mustard cow. And then all there was valves on it that allowed the sauce to get in the can. And if the machine stopped, then that person had to shut that valve off so it wouldn't boil over. But those machines would do, I think, around 60 to 80 cans a minute. And there would be a person, you can't see it very good here, but they had the covers and they would put them into the machine. And then as it went down, then they just put more covers on. Well, that loud banging that everybody was talking about, they had to emboss a code into the product. So that was the power it took to do that. It was quite loud. And then that was put on the cover before the cover put on the can. Then there was 2 stages on that machine. One was the first operation, and that started the seam. And then the second operation finished the seam off. And then we also had an inspector that would take the cans, tear the cover, show that can again. They would take and take that seam off, and then they'd have to inspect it. And they would cut a slot out on 4 sides and make sure that seam was in the proper specs. And that Ken Salvatore that we just lost recently, that was one of his jobs to do that. And the FDA would check those records and make sure that we was in spec. And once the cans were all sealed, they go down a conveyor belt through a can washer that wash all the residue off the can. And then they go into a retort. There was just a pressure cooker. There'd be 18,000 cans if that retort was full in there. And then the cover was put on. Then you had top steam, bottom vent to make sure the steam was going through the vessel. And then once the product was all done, then they would cool it down. They'd use fresh water and air to maintain the pressure until the temperature got down to a certain point. and then they would, take them out of the retort. Well, I was a retort operator for 2 years, I think it was, after I got out of high school. And, I thought, I always liked chocolate. I said, well, why don't we put up about 10 cans of chocolate sardines? And, so they said, okay. And the problem is, they put them in grease oil covers. And they put them in a bag. And we were doing beef oil sardines in that 18,000 can. If that bag had ever broke, I wouldn't be alive right now. But, they tasted pretty good. I was the only one that ate it. One time I was going down to let the retort out. We'd have on the bottom of the retort, we'd open up the door. And then go into a conveyor, and then another scan washer. Then they go into the bins to be cased out. Well, one night I was headed down to see how much longer that retort had to go before it was done. And the retort blew up. And I had cans flying right by my head. And it was only coming up to pressure. It wasn't all the way up. If it had been, I thought it was going to be hit at that film. But anyway, we had to take all those cans out and put them back into another retort and cook it off, then unload it. So that was the long night. So once the cans come out of the can washer and into the shipping room bin, the women would have to case them up. They would inspect, they'd grab like 5 cans, inspect and make sure there's no leaking product. And then they put them into a case. And that was piecework. So they would get how many cases they did in an hour, and that's how they got paid. Well, when I was about 8, 9 years old, I used to run down Old Factory Hill and help them carton put a carton over the can, put them into the case. But I had to do it to every one of them. They were casing up. So one of them didn't go on the other. But once they was cased up, they was put onto a pallet. And then the pallet would be taken up to the warehouse and stored there. After 2 weeks, we had to reopen each one of those cases to make sure we didn't have a leaking product in there. So that was a sniffing process. And they didn't have any problem finding that can. You'd be swallowed that up. So once there was 2 ways of loading the truck. One was each individual case by hand on a 40-foot truck. Or you take the pallet and put it on there, depends on where they was going. But I had another guy with me, we used to see how fast we could do it. Nowadays, you couldn't get anybody to do that. They'd have to be on the phone first. But that was a lot of work. And then we distribute the product all over the country. But if there was five fish to a can, that would have a possum brand. Those would be sold down south. And if there's beef oil, it'd be all over the United States. If it was hot chili peppers, they would go down south. But and speaking of the hot chili peppers, once the cans were after it's packed in steam box, then they would cool off. Then they'd be taken out of the cap, one tray at a time, put on the table, and the women would put 2 peppers in the can. And once that was full, put them back in the cart, and then they'd be sealed up. But that was a lot of work. And eventually, Father and another engineer got together, and where that silver dome is right there, they installed a pepper machine. That when that carousel would go around, it would drop the peppers into the product. But that saved a lot of time. But other than that, I don't have anything to tell. I'm running out of voice.
We do have a little time for questions, I think, and I'd like to start it off by asking Rita a question. Did you take care of did you sharpen your own scissors, or did the company do that for you?
No, usually the company had somebody that would sharpen. You had to pay for it. But, no, they would do it because, but you definitely needed to keep them sharp at all times.
Okay.
I just wanted to, before we take more questions, I just wanted to bring your attention to, once we get up and move around, there's a display table with some materials that Peter has brought and also from the Historical Society. You'll see the Beach Cliff cans. There's a lady, if you wanna see the rocking motion, you can tap her shoulder and she'll rock.
You need that.
We actually had a packer that did that.
Yeah.
Yeah, Charlotte Ridge. Yeah, and on her forward motions when she cut fish, cut the head up.
One thing I forgot, I do have my can, and I do have my little sardines. And I was going to demonstrate, because a lot of people aren't aware of how it's actually done. You have your scissor hand, obviously if you're right-handed, that's your right hand. And a lot of people didn't realize that often, most of us pick the fish up with our scissor hand. So you pick the fish up with your scissor hand, you would move it to your other hand, you'd snip and snip, and then while you're putting it in the can, you're reaching for another fish. And so you would be very, and that's where that rocking motion came, you go, flip, 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 and that's what you get into that rhythm of how you did it. Now, we love eights, because eights was the biggest fish that you could have, that you didn't have to cut the tail off. So you could pack eights really fast, snip, 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 snip. You didn't have to flip that hand over. But like Peter said, sometimes we would have eights and fives. So we had two different cases going, and you had to sort the fish as you packed them. So, you have can, you might have pick up an 8 and you might have pick up a 5 and, so there was a lot to it.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to also, because you mentioned, Peter's, display here. And I think he's got the names of all the workers that he could remember.
Well, between that, I've had about 5 people that helped me remember some names.
Yeah, and if your name isn't on there, and it should be,
Let me
let
know,
know.
I'll add it to it. Eventually, I'd like to have you down in the Historical Society.
Yeah.
One thing I forgot to mention, we had a whistle too. And the whistle will blow 5 times and the women had to be there in an hour. And we also had buses that would pick them up. The other thing was, if it blew once, my father was the plant manager, he got a phone call. If it blew twice, Bill Walsh, the assistant manager, he got a phone call. If it blew 3 times, the shipping and foreman had a phone call. Well, my father thought he could do some lobster fishing with about a half dozen traps up in the harbor. Every time he get up there and haul the first trap, the whistle blow. He had to go back in and answer the phone call.
We've got a comment from Karen Ryan online. I recently learned that John Whitmore was working for his uncle Alan Lawler in Southwest Harbor Clam Factory back in 1902, when Jim Dole came around looking for someone to help him with his pineapples. Whitmore worked in Hawaii for the next 30 years, a key partner in the Dole canned fruit empire. Maine knew how.
Wow. Interesting.
I'm wondering what the magic seal is that works on oily cans. Like, why did that seal?
Okay, there's a compound inside of that, I wish I had the cover, but I don't. There's a compound in the cover itself that goes on top of that sardine can. And then once that first operation goes, that starts forming the seal. And then the second operation irons it out. And then it's sealed. And then the retort process kind of glues it together and makes it hermetically sealed.
I can know. Do you veterans eat sardines?
Especially chocolate.
The ones that were in here were fed to the cat.
What did the flaking machine do?
The flaking machine would put the product to the packing line. And when I was like 8 years old, I said, by then they didn't have that anymore. That was in turn different than putting them in the tank, taking them out of the tank and putting them up the conveyor belt.
Gotta cut it. All right, this is from Sarah Corson. I can read all this. When I was a kid in the late 1940s and 1950s, from our house in Bunker Cove at Islesford, a common, if not unusual, sight was the fishermen coming into the cove quietly in a skiff with a man in the bow with a long pole looking for the herring running in. In later years, they used a small plane to look for herring. In any case, the herring were often plentiful and nets were set overnight from out tree rocks to head rocks across the cove to trap the fish. In the morning, they pulled the nets together, steaming with fish into a pound. Seiners would come in one at a time. There are 7 waiting to pick up loads of herring. Sometimes there were so many fish that the men, and they were all men, would have to stay out there for 24 to 48 hours at a time. In our rowboat, my big sisters took pies and cakes out to them. Sometimes they returned with a huge fish for our family. Question here. I expected to hear about sardines, but not herring. What % of the packing and business was related to herring?
Say that again, please.
Yeah. A gentleman online was saying he expected to hear about sardines, but not as much about herring.
Same.
Same. Herring and sardines are the same.
The herring process in the society.
Other questions?
I'll just share, I got it. So. I didn't think I would get to this story because, you know, there's so much. And Terese was like, why don't you tell your thing? I'm like, because everyone's got so much to say, but we have a couple seconds, so. My friend who's here tonight, she drove quite a ways to get here. We worked one really cold, dismal winter at Stinson's. It was a really hard winter. And I never got fast at packing, so I was always on the machines. And Peter was talking about the machine that puts the oil in the cans. I was often on the mustard machine. And someone asked, do you still eat sardines? Well, I never liked them anyway. But when I was a kid, I loved mustard. But that machine, I swear, used to break down. It felt like every 5 minutes, there'd be this bright yellow mustard on, and it was good mustard, raised mustard, right? But bright yellow on this blue floor, and I can still see it. And the odor of that mustard just went everywhere. And to this day, even though I appreciate it as a culinary thing, I cannot abide mustard. That was 50, well, almost 50 years ago.
Anita Beebe. Hi, my name is Anita Lewis, and I grew up in Southwest Harbor. Both my mom and dad were employed by Stinson Canning Company. My dad, Fred Lewis, was captain of a sardine carrier named Joyce Marie.
Yeah.
And my mom was Eudora Lewis, who you showed a picture of in this presentation. I also had an aunt and uncle who worked at the factory as well. Their names were Fred and Mabel Worcester. And I worked during the summers when I was in high school as well, and I graduated high school in 1962. Second question was, how many hours did you invest in the research for this fabulous project?
Oh.
Yes, 6 to 8 hours on the computer, just putting those names in.
Thank you very
40
much.
years.
Yeah.
When I started writing this.
So we have, the Historical Society has a display case at the Tremont town office. So it kind of started when some people were switching out the display case and decided it always has a theme. So the theme was sardines. And at that point, that was the first query about memories. Well, this is like the second wave of that. And so, but while doing the display case, one of our other members was here doing research on the digital archive, got talking to E-Rich. He says, you guys should do a program. And so we had our little Zoom meeting, and so they're like, okay, Kathy, have you talked to E-Rich? I'm like, okay. So we met back in January, Terese, I don't do Facebook, so Terese put all the pictures together, compiled all these wonderful stories. Nan used her skills to write them up. These two, to just talking on the phone with them, I knew Peter, knows every bit of it, from catching the fish to, it going out the door. This lady had me entertained on the telephone. We'd never met. She had me on the phone for over an hour. I was laughing. I'm like, Rita, you need to come do this. So I would say in the making of this particular program, well, it was not every day, of course, but it took months, really. Yeah. And we're keeping this, right? So this is now an oral history. Plus all the wonderful photos. We have, we're started an archive of this, industry. We already had a bunch of really old photos, but we're compiling it and will be available to the public, once it's kind of in good shape. So.
And this video, this program will be is recorded and it will be on our YouTube channel. And anyone who signed up will get a link to it, or you can look for our YouTube channel online and it'll be up in the next few days. Or next week, but it'll be soon. Yep.
I'm just really curious. I'm the one who drove, Kathy's friend. How many people here have worked in the sardine factory?
Oh my
Even if it's a day or two.
How many names do you have so far? He's been collecting names of people, even if they only worked a day.
Around 300.
300 so far. And counting.
I'm probably 1,500 to 2,000 short.
You have my most. You have the names, just the stencils and everything.
I didn't do anything with Bass Harbor. I had nothing to do with Southwest Harbor.
All right, thank you all so much for coming this evening. We appreciate it, and thank you all for being here and making this part of it.